Okay, my name is Martin Carlberg. I work for a company called Oops, and I'm also a core developer at or with the Cappuccino framework. And it's really nice to be here. Nice to see you all here. It's and I'm going to talk a little bit today about three things. First, I'm going to start talking about why we use Cappuccino, and I'm going to talk about source map and how we debug things in the debugger at the moment, which is a much better experience than we had before. And also I'm going to talk a little bit about Node, where we are right now and how we're going to move forward about that. The big system we use for, and where we use Cappuccino, is actually an apartment broker system for the city of Göteborg. We use Cappuccino for one part of it, so to speak. This is not the Cappuccino application, this is the website for the system. And what it does is we have a lot of members who will apply for apartments in the city, and there are a bunch of landlords. The biggest one are city-owned, who has apartments, and when they want to go or give out the contracts to someone, they go through this system. And what we have here is a website that's not written in Cappuccino. That was the one you saw in the first picture. We have a backend, and which actually is written in Objective-C, running on Macs. And then we have an Office application that is written in Cappuccino. And this is just a picture of how it looks, the application. You have different states for the different apartments here, and we handle quite a lot of volume there. I think they have something like 10,000 contracts every year they handle. And here you see an apartment with all the addresses and lease, number of rooms and all that stuff here. So it's kind of basic type of desktop application that we use here. There is another view. We have a lot of table views. We do a lot of bindings. And use all the features that's in Cappuccino, and we couldn't have done actually an application like this with so few people. We are 3 to 4 developers, and the city has 4 people in the project too, which are non-developers. And to do a system this big, and it shouldn't be possible without using a framework like Cappuccino. And what are the main reasons we have, or what we see actually, the main benefits for using Cappuccino? Well, the first one is actually what Alex talked about. You have a fantastic foundation where you get so much for free that as I said before, you can't actually do an application like this with so few people without a great foundation like this. So this is actually the main thing, I think. And also, the second thing is you have a good stability on the API. We started doing this for, 6 years ago, and it's the same framework actually we have now than we had 6 years ago, almost. We get more improvements and more features in the Cappuccino frameworks all the time, but if you're serious about doing a desktop application in a business environment, you want to have stability. If you don't have stability, you can't rewrite everything because you have a new framework every second or third year, because there's a new version, someone comes up with something new. And this is really common in the JavaScript world. It's getting a little bit better. And we would not have been able to do and maintain this application with this small group of people without the stability. So that's also a very good thing that we see when we're using Cappuccino. And also another thing is that I think is great about Cappuccino, because we mimic the Cocoa frameworks that Apple has actually made and put a lot of effort into. There is a ton of people there working really, really hard to decide how it should work. And then you can think it's good or bad, it doesn't matter. They actually think about it and makes a framework that has a lot of features in them. So when we develop or add features to the Cappuccino framework, we actually don't need to think that much on exactly how should we do things, because we have the correct answer somewhere. We can check the Cocoa frameworks. And that's really helps, I think, too. Also, we like the tools very much. The interface builder is actually excellent. It's amazing how easy you can do all the interfaces and so on. And we Xcode we use for editing mostly. Sometimes we use other editors too. It depends on the developer, I guess. Yeah, so this is why we use Cappuccino and why we think it's so good. Okay, I'm going to go over to source map and talk about this. It's a great new feature actually in the browsers, where we can. It actually, they've done it because usually you're minifying your JavaScript file, and then you can't debug and so on in this small file with everything on one line and so on. So what they do is you have the source code here that you write. Usually they started this with doing just JavaScript here. And then you have a build process here, and you minifying the file to some generated code over here, which is, and then when you run it in the debugger, you're going to sit here and try to debug and find, you don't going to recognize your code. So what they did was, in the build process, they created a source map file, which will map each position, each line, line 1, position 5, corresponds to line 5 there and position 62 or whatever. So whenever the debugger stops somewhere in this code, it can translate where the positions are over to the correct file. And you can actually have many source files generated to one generated code file, and the source map file will handle that. So if you are in different parts of the code, you will actually be in different files in your source code. And this has developed for a couple of years, and it's not really finished yet. There are good supports in most of the browsers, but they still can do a lot more. I will show that later on. And what we did here was we actually included this in the Objective-J compiler to create this source map file. So you can actually have the Objective-J file here, and you have the JavaScript file here. As most of you have probably debugged your Objective-J code in the JavaScript code, and it's kind of messy. You have all these strange message send methods and so on. It's kind of hard. Eventually you will learn what it represents, but it should be much nicer to have the real Objective-J code to debug in. One problem here is you actually have a lot of files here. You have your source code here. In our case, you have the Objective-J code in one file or in many files. You have the generated code file, which is the one that actually runs. And you have the source map file. They are actually 3 different files. Oh, yeah, I'll talk about this a little bit more. Yeah, we can continue there. And this is how do we get it to how can we use it in a Cappuccino project? We have in the index file, we can set the compiler flags in your project, and this is what the default ones are for the debug at the moment. But if you have an old project, you have to include this source map compiler flag for the compiler to generate these files. I usually include the debug symbols and the type signatures, which is just a little bit more information there in the generated code. And also, what we did a couple of years ago, we can inline message send method. In the beginning, we actually called a function called message send, which will call the method. But to improve speed, we added an option so the compiler can include the code for this in a very neat way. So we don't need to call an extra function, which speeds up the whole Objective-J program very much. And I think you should always use this here. I will show you later on, because when you have the stack trace, when you're debugging, you eventually will have, if you don't use this, you will have a call to the message send, and then you usually have a decorator or whatever in the message send that will be able to print out the stack trace that we don't need anymore. So for each calls, you have 3 lines in the stack, which is kind of confusing. If you use this, you only get 1 for each. But I will show that later on. The same thing in the Jake file. You have to make sure that you have included the S flag there. These are stupid old flags that are compatible with GCC, of course. Some old stuff that's still in the in the build system. I blame you, Francisco, I guess. But we're still using that. Yeah. So this is kind of weird, but you have to make sure in your project file, in your the Jake file in your project, you have to include this to get the source maps. And what will happen when we do this is actually, I talked about 3 files there, but what we've done here is actually done a really nice thing, because usually you want to have, you create a map file that's going to you're going to put on your web server. You have the source file you're going to put on your web server, and you have the generated code that you should put on you always put on your web server. But what we have done here, this is what you do here in the generated code that tells the browser that you have the source map. You have this bracket, or no, not bracket, what do you call that? Hash, yeah, hash source mapping URL, and that will point to the actually map file. And the map file is going to have point to the source files. But what you can do is actually include the source into the map file. And what you can do here is you can also include the whole map file in the generated code file if you use this data URL. So the neat thing here is we actually get just one file, the generated source file, which will, and this line here, it continues forever. It's bigger than the rest of the file, because this is the whole source of this file plus the map file. So when you do this, you're going to increase the size of your generated code files a lot. But when you're debugging, it's worth it, because it will be really easy, because you don't do anything. You have just one generated file, which includes the map file, the source file, the whole thing. So it's really easy. Yeah, and that I just said. So, yeah, when you build the Cappuccino frameworks, the debug version will include the map file and the source file for each generated file. So if you just use the debug version of Cappuccino, you will automatically get source maps, which is really convenient. A demo, it's always nice to have a demo. It's a little bit smaller. Let's see if I must be able to use a better. I should be able to turn off the, there you go. Is that better? Maybe. Looks like it's too much. Does it have HD? It should. Okay. Okay, let's go for that. We'll let's see if we can see anything here. This is the login page for the Office application we have in our big project. Let's see here. Let's open the, maybe we can't, I can't read that.
just press Command plus to browser scaling?
I don't think so. I can do that on the debugger, or can I? Okay, let's try it. I will just increase the size of, let me change the resolution there. I think it's too big. Try that one. Or even that one, I guess. I think that's better. Okay, let's try to get back to the demo here. Okay, now you can see a little bit better. Let me drag this down. We want to have this a little bit bigger. We're going to show. So here we have the source. What I can do here is I can open, say, login manager, login controller. I think we have one. And what you see here is you have only JS files, and that is because I have. That's strange. Yeah, I'm on the wrong place. Thank you. Here we go. Let's. Here you go. This is what I wanted. Sorry. Here you have the login controller .js, and you can still go here and check the old file. You have this the code here, the generated one, with all the message send functions and all this stuff that you don't recognize. But if you want to, you can open the other file, the .j file, and you will have your regular Objective-J file. And this source is actually coming from the generated file, which has this URL at the end, which includes the map file and this source file here. So what I've done here is actually I put the breakpoint here at the login user method. So if I go up here, enter the password, something weird, I try to click on the login. What happens is I actually break down here, and as you saw also in Alex's presentation there on the movie there, you will actually see the we can step in here and so on. We're going to do a step in. Sometimes this is not 100%, so sometimes you will get into JavaScript. Oh, this is actually JavaScript, the forward function. And the nice thing here is actually you can, I will show you another place. Let's get on here. And what you see exactly where you are the browser will show you exactly in which position you are in this line. So here it's going to call the object value from the password field here. So it's going to grab the password from this text field. And if we step into this object method there, we go out again, then you see it will show you, it will go the whole line there. It means it's going to go down in the main method. And you can step forward here. And the nice part here is actually, I'm going to show you a couple of things. The browser has support for holding the cursor over something, and it will show you the value. This is undefined actually because it hasn't got any value there. We have the this one should have something. There you go. Here you have a text string and all that. And what I also did in the compiler, I added, because a function is actually in JavaScript, it's just anything like any variable. So what you can do is you can actually, if you look here, you have the cp_url request calling the request with URL method. And what you see here, the browser is actually showing us the line and the code here in the cp_url request on line 140. There is this method. And this is actually not a feature that they have. But what I did here is I actually created the compiler to generated some dummy code that it's not used. It just evaluates the function of the methods. So it looks it up and actually doesn't use it. I only generated this in the compiler when we do the debug version. But this allows us to actually, the browser will actually show you the method when you hold it over the selector. So what I did in the map file, I took the selector and map it to some code that's generated, but it's not used, that evaluates the function. So it will actually point to the method here. Here is a feature that the browser will not be fully supporting the map or source map because it points to the JavaScript file. The nice thing here is I actually can point, I can point, click here, and what happens is we jump directly to this method. But the problem is it jumps to the JavaScript file instead. But this is, they've talked a little bit about it in the mailing list with Chrome, because people want Chrome to support this. So you will jump to the source or the .j file here, the regular source file. But there is a little trick you can do here. You can actually set a breakpoint here. Pop. And when you do that, it will translate over to. So here is that method. So it's really convenient. You can, in the browser, you can actually jump to the different methods and so on, which is a really nice feature, which is done by, actually, we just added some code that actually is executed, but it's kind of dummy code. This is really nice. You can do the let's see here. You have the console somewhere. Don't we have that? Um,
You left the sources.
there.
No.
There you go. Thank you. And here you can actually, certainly you can, let's get back to the stack here, the last one here. If I want to do something like that, I can certainly use the everything here in the console. Everything works. It's really nice, and it's a really good experience compared to how we debugged in the old days, so to speak. There are a couple of bugs here and there, and sometimes the mapping is not 100% because it's kind of complex for the browser to map everything because it's actually a different language than this is actually done for JavaScript to JavaScript mapping. So, okay, any questions about source map? Yes?
One, does it work without Jake? Or do you need Jake for that?
To do what, you mean?
To have the source map in place. Can I run from source and have the source map?
Yeah, certainly. You can do it as long as you included this option, compiler option in your index file. It will actually create a source map too when you just run from source in the browser. And if you want to run Jake, you have to include a -s flag in the Jake file if you create a project with Jake. So both version works. And the default for the frameworks are the debug version includes the source map and the release version doesn't. So, and beware that the size of the generated files are at least twice as big in the debug version, but computers are so fast these days. So, okay, that's a nice feature. What's that source map? Let's talk about Node. I'm going to talk about here the background, a little bit how Cappuccino runs outside of the browser. And little bit where are we today with the Node. It's a long journey here actually. And what would we like to change in the future? This is a very simplified view of how it works when you run in the command line on the machine here. What we have our different tools: Jake, nib2zib, the compiler. We have press and flatten and or whatever. You can make your own tools too if you want to, and we have a couple of more. And that, in basic, it runs on top of something called Narwhal, which is I don't know, Francisco. Is it Tom who made Narwhal or yeah? And actually, it's great actually, but it's old, so to speak. And one of the nice features are actually that you can. And what it is kind of a library you have on top of your JavaScript engine. And the nice feature with Narwhal is you can actually build engines here. And the Rhino engine is the oldest one. It runs in Java, and I don't know too much about it. It's old, slow. You have the JavaScript core, which is actually a Mac tool, you can say, which opens web view. which gets the max JavaScript engine, and then it runs the JavaScript code inside the web view, simplified. And what you do here is actually, there is a template in Narwhal. You can actually add an engine. It's like an API or a protocol or whatever. You implement a couple of functions, and you can run this thing on top of the engine. And then where are we today, though, with this? And the thing is, 2 years ago, when we had the last CappCon, I actually showed you an Objective-J runtime that run on Node. And what it does is actually it runs a couple of tools, and you can make your own backend application in Objective-J and run it on Node. It worked 2 years ago, it works today. It's really neat, and it doesn't have all the build tools and all that stuff that's included in the Cappuccino framework, but actually you can, and it mimics how we run an Objective-J app in the browser. So it compiles on the fly and all that stuff. So it's kind of neat. It's really nice, and I kind of slimmed down everything about the runtime very much to make it work. One problem with it, you can't run the Jake and nib2zib tools at the moment. Work can be done so we can run those tools too, but it's a lot of work because Jake and nib2zib and all that uses kind of some functions that's so you have to put some work on it and look at each tool and so on, so it takes some time. This runtime, this is the URL on GitHub where I have the runtime if someone wants to take a look at it. There is also demo backend, which I showed last CappCon, where I had a backend and I did a model file and I did an application just within Face Builder. It was really neat, no code at all. We used an open source framework we've made that we use in our Office application, and so you can actually do an Cappuccino application just in Face Builder, and you have the backend, it saves everything to the database and so on, so without any lines of code at all. It were very nice. So if we have this setup, we've been trying to get Node running, Cappuccino running on Node for some time, and Aparita did try a couple of years, but eventually I think he made a great effort, but I think the bite he was taking was too big. I mean, he tried to rewrite everything, and he did a lot of good things there, but eventually we never came to a point where we could use it. Maybe we can go back and use parts of what he's done, but what we're doing now is actually we're trying to do small steps here so we can actually get something running on Node. So what happened now is actually we have a Node engine that runs underneath narwhal. And that's the easiest way, actually. We haven't changed anything, almost. Some of them we have changed. But to add this was kind of easy. We got help of a guy called Frank. He's not here today, but I don't remember his last name now. Yes, he did a perfect job on that, helped us with that. And so now we can run some of the tools here. The problem is some of these tools use special functionality, especially press and flatten. They use Rhino special functions, so you can only run press and flatten on the Rhino engine. You can't run it on the JavaScript core, so you have to run it on this. Now we have made flatten work on Node 2, so it's rewritten. Press we have not done yet. And there are, so we can't do all the parts of the tool chain yet. So the question is was it this simple to just add engine? No, of course not. This is where I had it. Flatten and press can only run on the Rhino. Flatten is fixed. We also have a minification tool that's called shrink save. It's a Java tool, actually. We've used it for a very long time. It's Java based, and right now, I mean, we can use any JavaScript based. You have the Uglify, JS, or whatever. There are a ton of different tools. But this is this is something that we need to go in and change in the tool. In the tools too, we have to remove this because we don't want to use Java anymore. And I think this is kind of easy, low-hanging fruit. So if someone wants to take a bite at this one and try to use something else, feel free. I don't think that's a huge workload to do. So this is kind of a small step we are trying to do here to add Node as a narwhal engine. But in the long run, we want to actually remove narwhal. It's a little bit too old, and I mean, we don't need a Rhino engine. We actually don't need the JavaScript core engine, even though it's really fast and really nice. It's enough if you just run on Node. It's almost as fast as JavaScript core. And then we just can remove narwhal and kind of clean up with all the tools we have. But I think the best way to do this is doing it in small steps all the time here. Let's do a demo. I don't need that one. Why is that open? No, we can't. Here we go. Here we have command line. This is the cappuccino directory, the root directory of cappuccino. So what we do here, if we do a Jake install, we're going to build it. I'm just going to do a easy, and I'll show you here. Right now I've set up the narwhal engine is using JavaScript core, and we can change that. Now I use the fish shell, so it's a little bit different if you use bash. But I set the Narwhal engine environment variable here. We can look at that again. Now we have Node here instead. And I'll do it. Now I do sudo echo because I don't want to type the sudo password in the middle of the build. I want to do it in the beginning, and then I do jake install here, so I'll type the password first. Okay, I'm going to try to. The only thing you can see, I mean, it's going to run and build the Cappuccino framework the same way as before, because you're not going to see any difference. The only thing, what I'm going to show you here is actually go in the activity monitor and show you that Node is actually running in the back here. So here it starts to build. And you can see it actually Node is up and running here, 130% something. Otherwise, it just looks exactly the same. It doesn't matter if we run the Rhino engine or the JavaScript core engine or the Node engine. But it's a small demo that it actually works here. But the problem is we can't use it all the way, so to speak. We can't do on our own project, if we do jake deploy, it will run press and flatten. It can't run on Node, so it won't work. So we are actually not there all the way yet, but almost, and it's small steps all the time there. And I can say that it's a lot of work that needs to be done on these things here. All the tools we have to fix, but it's not that much. We try to do it in small steps, and eventually we can remove Narwhal, maybe remake the tool chain, and build with something else. Maybe we should remove jake, I don't know. As long as we take small steps forward, I think we can clean this up a little bit. So, yes, any questions about Node? If you want to help, just send me a message somewhere. I'll show you what can be done and so on. So, yes, thank you. That's what I had.